Lion Media.
George Harrison, primarily famous as the Beatles' handsome lead guitarist and co-composer, was this and so much more. As time goes by, young people, while Beatles fans, may not know that Harrison was pretty much the father of what we now call world music, for his work with Ravi Shankar and the Radha Krishna Temple, among many other groundbreaking artists. He was most certainly this, as well as the originator of the Superstar Charity Concert, as with his now iconic Concert for Bangladesh. But arguably, his most important contribution to global culture was his promotion and adherence to Vedic-inspired spirituality via the beautiful Hare Krishna movement and, for the purposes of this audiobook, Transcendental Meditation, or TM, as taught by His Holiness the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. George Harrison.
Well, I'm unhappy about the world being concreted over and all the forests chopped down and the air polluted, and the fact that the planet is in the control of mad people. People who are crazy, people who are greedy, all these people who are selling the rainforest and, any forests, just selling it because they make some money. I'm very unhappy about that, but I have a long-term view, which is all things must pass. I mean, before it used to be maybe they're going to blow us up with H-bombs, but even that, I thought, it don't really matter. They can't destroy what's within ourselves. Krishna said, there's no time when we didn't exist, and there'll be no time when we cease to exist. The only thing that changes is the body. So even if they blew us up with H-bombs, our soul will stay in our other astral body, and the only thing that won't be here is physical. So, I'm sad about it, the world, but I look at it from within and without.
One of the mandates here as seekers of pure, unbiased spiritual truth is to introduce, and in some cases reintroduce, people of all generations to the inspirational, classical, spiritual literature of the ages. The following audiobook falls into that very select and important category. Here you will find ageless wisdom, timeless truisms, and unbounded inspiration from ancient Hindu texts such as the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Upanishads, and so many more from the voluminous Vedas of ancient India. We too examine the deepest truths of the Torah, the Christian scriptures, as well as the Quran, Tao Te Ching, the teachings of Confucius, Gautama Buddha, and even the great Zoroaster. Likewise, we contemplate the wisdom of contemporary teachers such as Meher Baba, Paramahansa Yogananda, Vivekananda, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, as well as Kihil Gibran, Swami Sachit Ananda, Baba Ramdas, and Terence McKenna, to name only a very few. Here we cast the net wide to include the humble parables of Jesus, the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, as well as legendary life-changing eternal avatars such as Sri Krishna, Lord Rama, Vishnu, Shiva, and the Buddha, to include the greatest insights of the ever-expanding spiritual universe. As a now old incredible string band song goes, may the long-time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way home. For Icon Audiobooks, I'm Geoffrey Giuliano.
Sir Richard Starkey and Paul McCartney.
Over 40 years ago,
we ended up in Rishikesh, and that's where we met. Well, it wasn't where we met. It's where we hung out with Maharishi. We'd met him a few months before in Wales. And since then, sometimes a lot and sometimes a little, I have meditated. And, it's a gift he gave me. Was my mantra, that's something I could use and something no one could take away. So it's one of the few things I was ever given that means that much to me. And we went together, actually.
We did.
We were in the same cab. And we went over this bridge. You remember the bridge we went over? And, it's India. And there was all these people sitting on this bridge as we went over the Ganges with these pots of money. And I couldn't understand it.
I don't remember it.
No. And I was thinking, because, they'd lost a lot of the fingers and noses because they all had leprosy. And, it's just like, you're in a strange country when you go to India. It's not like, France or Denmark. It's different. Anyway,
that's true.
Up to you now. Thank you.
That's true. Well, I haven't got a lot left to say after that. I think that covered it all. And leprosy. No, seriously, what Ringo says, it was a great gift that Maharishi gave us. For me, it came at a time when we were looking for something to kind of stabilize us towards the end of the crazy 60s. And it's a lifelong gift. It's something that you can call on at any time. And I think it's a great thing.
There is a rare film of a long-ago afternoon in February 1968 preserved by an Italian television crew who, along with the rest of the world's media, descended on the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's enclave in Rishikesh for a glimpse of the Beatles as aspiring mystics. Even today it is an enticing image. Here are John, Paul, George, Ringo, Mike Love, Donovan, Mia Farrow, with her sister Prudence and brother Johnny, and the Beatle wives singing sweetly to the jangling of acoustic guitars, "She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain," when the Saints go marching in, fronted by George Harrison and Mia Farrow. "You Are My Sunshine," "Jingle Bells," as well as a ragged rendition of the Hare Krishna mantra. The Maharishi urged everyone, "Fathom the infinity. Dive into the Ganges, fathom the infinity." To which George replied, "Hey, I guess we don't merely just exist after all." I played it all back in my head in the early summer of 2000 as I struggled along in the stifling midday sun past the sparkling Ganges, past the thatched huts of small groups of ashen-covered, dope-smoking Babas, and finally the monsoon-carved, boulder-strewn left turn that took me to the Maharishi's padlocked front door. Over the years, I've spent a lot of time in Rishikesh, first drawn there in the early 1990s by images I saw as a kid flickering across my family's old black-and-white TV of George, John, and their friends walking peacefully along brick walkways lined with painted stones, deep inside the Maharishi's secret Shangri-La. Driving along the road from Hardwar, the nearest train stop from Delhi, I might have missed it, but even without being told, I knew somehow that this was the place. Although the area had been built up over succeeding decades, Rishikesh is still very much a quaint village highlighted by an astounding black-topped suspension bridge, Ramjula, that connects the seeker to the other side of the Ganges. It is only just wide enough for 2 or 3 people to walk across shoulder to shoulder. After a sharp right turn, you are on the home stretch to Maharishi Central circa 1968, the place where the Beatles were inspired to write some of their most compelling and spiritual music. Look hard enough and you will find photos of all of the Beatles arriving as I did on that gently swaying bridge. If nothing else, the wide swirling Ganges and the cloud-covered blue mountain range are enough to touch the hardest of hearts. In this still magical valley, there are dozens of tiny temples from which by 4:30 in the morning you can hear the echoes of blowing conchs, the chanting of the Hindu faithful, the smell of the pungent aroma of dhup, North Indian hand-rolled incense, and smouldering cow-dung fires. Rishikesh overwhelms the senses and, within moments of arrival, transmits an immediate peace. After a few days, the restless mind reads that as boredom, but it soon turns into something deeper, richer, and much harder to define. Almost as soon as the Beatles had left in the late spring of 1968, the Maharishi ordered the heavy iron front gates locked. No one, except local caretakers, some Indian followers, and those foreigners bearing a signed letter from the master, were allowed entrance. As I fell into none of those categories on my first trip to Rishikesh in 1998, I was turned away in brusque Hindi by the guard. Still, I was determined to see inside the place in hopes it might somehow have remained frozen in time. After some debate, my wife at the time, Vrinda, and I decided that if we got up early enough, around 5 or 6, we might just be able to sneak in. Not expecting intruders at such an early hour, the guard was sound asleep at his post, his rifle tucked under his chin in the small booth at the outside perimeter. We walked silently through the 10-acre estate, with its own functioning post office, a large multi-story dormitory, and several dilapidated stone cottages. Then we decided to sneak out through a second gate at the opposite end of the property. There we met a good-natured, wide-awake guard who advised us politely not to go out that way, as there were most certainly man-eating tigers, spitting cobras, and several wild elephants in the jungle beyond, not to mention the 300-foot drop directly into the rock-strewn river below. Several months later, I took my 24-year-old son Devon, a family friend from Delhi, and a couple of mischievous Indian boys inside at dusk. This time there was no guard, no guns, and even no gate. Apparently the decades-long policy of guarding the birthplace of the Beatles' White Album and the spiritual revolution of the 60s had been abandoned. As we ventured inside the basement of a large dormitory, an old man rushed over from one of the cottages and warned us to come out immediately, as the tigers often came at dusk to feast upon young deer in the ravaged rooms that had once hosted the elite of the pop world. We didn't have to be told twice. We made our way to the famous house where the master had met privately with the Beatles to discuss the inscrutable truth he had offered the war-weary world of the late 1960s. It was not at all the million-dollar house to which John Lennon had referred impishly in his quasi-musical litany to the Maharishi, but rather a simple stone and wood house with several large windows that allowed us to see inside. There was a moderately large living room, a kitchen, and perhaps 2 bedrooms at the back. Legend has it there is a cave underneath the house where the Maharishi performed deep meditation. What struck me was how often writers like myself, without any first-hand knowledge, exaggerated John's description that this house was some kind of mansion with a helipad. The Maharishi's elaborate chair, or asan, with carved lion's feet, stood empty on a veranda facing the compound, broken, weather-beaten, and perhaps not used since the Beatles had sat round and strummed their acoustic guitars. The next morning I came back alone, excited, and almost able to feel the imprint of the Beatles and company from some 30 years ago. This time I met an old sannyasi or renunciate, Ravinda Damodar Sarup Swami, a godbrother of the Maharishi. He remembered well the Beatles' brief but very public time there, and dancing with Mia Farrow during an impromptu acoustic concert by Donovan, the Beatles, and Mike Love on the roof of the dining hall. He also recalled the day a helicopter took John Lennon and the Guru for a ride over the Rishikesh Valley. Intrigued, I questioned him further, but he only smiled and offered me a tattered notebook he took from a trunk. It contained some 70 pages of scrawled Hindi, which had evidently been a monk's diary. "You write book about Beatles and Guru Maharaj, then you must read this, my writing from that time. Everything is here. You please take, sir," he ventured. He asked me to return it after I had read it. He then walked me down along the curving lane to the front gates of the Ganges, pointing out along the way 4 pebble-covered stone domes, which he said the Maharishi had built for the Beatles to use for their advanced meditation. Inside, the little buildings were about 10 feet round at the base, with a small area for resting, reading, or eating, and a little wooden ladder to a platform on which they would presumably have sat in the lotus position to ascend into the lofty Godhead from which we all sprang. They were never used. In many ways, the Maharishi's Rishikesh estate is a kind of cultural time warp. The events which took place there so long ago have somehow imprinted themselves on its fiber. Pilgrimage is an ancient and important element of human history, and my trek to Rishikesh informed and inspired this book. There, amongst the old stones, rusted signs, tigers, and solitary sadhus, many of my views on the Beatles' real import in our cultural history were crystallized. In the exotic, perfumed Himalayan foothills, I was surrounded by the ghosts of John Lennon and his cohorts, and simultaneously exorcised any doubts which I might have had about going forward with this potentially risky book. Here, in a visionary flash, John and Paul were sitting on the stone steps of the former bungalow composing the gentle I Will, while Ringo smoked a cigarette at their feet. As Donovan and George played love songs in the sunny grounds, the Beatle wives chatted in a circle with the children of the ashram staff. Overwhelmed by the enduring magic that hovered amongst the broken buildings, I left my companions to stand alone along the edge of the mountain about which Donovan had once sung, "First there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is," and made a kind of silent pact with history before me. For everything that this place, and indeed the Beatles, had given me, I would write without reservation or restraint. 2 years later, I am in a cramped mobile home in a northern Florida campground, and you are at the other end of this collection of words which spilled out of my search for the Beatles' secret history. Whether or not I got it right now seems entirely up to you.
Mahesh Prasad Varma, the son of a schoolteacher, was born in Jabalpur, India in 1918 and graduated from Allahabad University with a physics degree in 1942. He soon abandoned his worldly aspirations, however, spending the next 13 years living as an ascetic, uncovering the delicate mysteries of meditational yoga. During that time, he took initiation from his spiritual master, or Guru Dev, and was given the name Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. In 1959, he traveled alone to the West and soon established the International Meditation Society in London and abroad. In the late summer of 1967, the Beatles attended one of Maharishi's lectures at the Hilton Hotel near Hyde Park. Afterwards, Maharishi met the group and invited them to go along to Bangor with him the next day. Accompanying them on the mystical special, as the Daily Mirror called it, were Mick Jagger, Marianne Faithfull, and Patty Harrison's younger sister, Jenny Boyd. Everyone was excited about the prospect of finally hooking up with an apparently genuine spiritual master. The next day, the Beatles were formally initiated and thus made plans to attend a 3-month teacher's training course at Maharishi's International Academy of Transcendental Meditation in the holy town of Rishikesh, India, in the foothills of the Himalayas. On February 14, 1968, they jetted from London, soon settling in at the Master's quiescent conclave next to the sparkling Ganges River. Maharishi was a wonderful teacher, recalls Cynthia Lennon, Beatle John's first wife. His talks were humorous, enlightening, and provided truly wonderful days. John and George, in particular, were in their element. Throwing themselves totally into Maharishi's expansive teachings, they were happy, relaxed, and above all, found a peace of mind denied them for so long. Paul McCartney, too, became very absorbed in Maharishi's philosophy, but Ringo Starr didn't particularly like the simple Indian food or the many insects, and complained that the stifling midday heat was keeping him from meditating properly. Many of the Beatles' close friends also joined them on the pilgrimage. There was Donovan, Beach Boy Mike Love, Mia Farrow, and her sister Prudence, to name a few. All in all, it was as perfect and peaceful an interlude as anyone could hope for. Eventually, the Fab Four publicly parted company with Maharishi, but surprisingly, John, Paul, George, and Ringo retained great affection for the diminutive guru and his enlightened teachings throughout their lives. As a matter of fact, George Harrison and Paul McCartney still occasionally utilize the TM technique to this day. Traveling the world, Maharishi oversaw the initiation and training of tens of thousands of aspirants of all faiths and spheres of endeavor. In the late 70s, however, he returned to India, spending the next 10 years directing his now global TM movement from the subcontinent. In 1990, Maharishi moved once again, this time to the Netherlands, attracted by the tolerant nature of its people and the beautiful pastoral countryside. These days, Maharishi, now in his 80s, reportedly meditates up to 20 hours per day, with his remaining time spent overseeing the activities of his roughly 1,000 transcendental meditation centers in over 100 countries, a chain of luxury hotels, and a highly successful line of Ayurvedic-inspired nutritional supplements. Maharishi's main thrust, however, has long been and always will be the propagation of his ancient Vedic-inspired teachings. Of the many high-profile swamis who have touched down in the West over the last several decades, only Maharishi's movement has remained really stable and indeed continues to thrive. Probably the first guru any of the baby boomers had ever really heard of, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi will be forever linked in our minds with that long-ago Summer of Love 1967 and his brief venue as the Beatles' engaging spiritual master. In this vintage clip recorded that same year, Maharishi is asked by journalists to explain his particular meditational technique, as well as his erstwhile relationship with the decidedly unascetic world of rock and roll.
One sits down comfortably in a chair or wherever one wants, and he uses a thought that he has been given especially for himself, and starts experiencing the subtler state of thought.
Are you experiencing the subtler state of thought at this moment?
No, I am out in the grot speaking to you.
What do you have to do to obtain this state of thought?
Just a few instructions from a trained teacher, and one begins to experience it.
How long does it take?
About half an hour.
And how do you know when it happened?
One begins to feel relaxed. Right from the beginning, one begins to feel some improved level of well-being. I preach a simple system of transcendental meditation which gives the people the insight into life, and they begin to enjoy all peace and happiness. And because this has been the message of all the saints in the past, they call me saint.
You seem also to have caught the imagination of the pop stars in this country.
What is this pop star?
People who sing with guitars. Have you anything to say about that?
I find that... You mean the Beatles?
Yes.
On August 27, 1967, the Beatles' manager and close friend Brian Epstein was mysteriously found dead of a drug overdose in his Belgravia townhouse in London. The group was in Bangor, Wales, being initiated into transcendental meditation by the Maharishi. In an ad hoc press conference outside the university venue's lecture hall, the obviously deeply shaken Beatles commented on the tragedy. It was a dramatic case of one door being closed and the other opened, the end result being that for whatever reasons, in just 3 short years, the Beatles would be no more.
Well, I don't know what to say, we've only just heard, and it's hard to think of things to say. But he was just a beautiful fella, and it's terrible.
What are your plans now?
Well, we haven't made any. I mean, we've only just heard, haven't we?
Yes, it's as much of a news to us as there is to everybody else.
Had you spoken to him since you became interested this weekend?
No.
I spoke to him Wednesday evening, the evening before we first saw Maharishi's lecture, and he was in great spirits.
And when did he tell you that he'd like to be initiated?
Well, when we arrived here on Friday, we got a telephone call later that day to say that Brian would follow us up and be here Monday.
Do you intend returning to Bangor before the end of this conference?
We probably won't have time now because Maharishi will only be here till about Thursday, and we'll have so much to do in London that we'll have to meet him again some other time.
I understand that this afternoon Maharishi conferred with you all. Could I ask you what advice he offered you?
He told us not to get overwhelmed by grief, and to whatever thoughts we have of Brian, to keep them happy, because any thoughts we have of him will travel to him wherever he is.
Had he ever met Mr. Epstein?
No, but he was looking forward to me.
John, where would you be today without Mr. Epstein?
I don't know.
Are you driving down to London tonight?
Yes, somebody's taking us down here.
You heard the news this afternoon, I believe.
Yes.
And Paul's already gone down?
Yes.
I see. You've no idea what your plans are for tomorrow?
No, we'd just go and find out, you know.
Just have to play everything by ear.
Yes. I understand that Mr. Epstein was to be initiated here tomorrow.
Yes.
When was he coming up? Was he coming up in the afternoon?
Tomorrow, just Monday, that's all we knew.
Had you told him very much about the spiritual regeneration movement?
Well, as much as we'd learned about spiritualism and various things of that nature, then we'd tried to pass on to him, and he was equally as interested as we are, as everybody should be. He wanted to know about life as much as we do.
Here in this never-before-heard recording, the Maharishi explains to his followers his initial meeting with and the cultural impact of the Beatles.
See, the Beatles bring out their own monthly magazine or something. In that they are writing people to meditate. Anyone who meditates, and no matter, becomes better. And this Beatle thing was not due to Beatles. All this worldwide publicity, it was not due to Beatles. What happened was, before I came to London last summer, that is 66, summer of 67, July, I was told that for about 8 months, the whole English press and English government and English clergy, all the church people and all the important people, whole education department, they were all worried for what they called drug mania of the youth. The children in the colleges, they're just drifting on to the use of these drugs. And many boys were sent to jails and all counseling by the church and all kinds of things. But nobody could stop them. And there was a great national concern over this. I was to speak there in some... And that lecture, the Beatles came to hear. After the lecture, now in that lecture I found quite a lot of questions about drugs here and there and there. And I replied as I replied. Then when the lecture was over and the whole thing stopped, some man came from behind the stage and said, Beatles were listening you and they want to hear you. They want to meet you. I said, tomorrow morning I am going to Wales and it's already 11 in the night, there won't be any time. But they said, but it's very important, they should talk to you. I said, when they can talk to me? Then he said, can't they come on this stage? I said, all right. Then draw the curtain. The curtain was drawn and I sat again on the stage. They came. I had been hearing some word Beatle from California, and I thought they may be boys, maybe 10 years, 12 years. But here came the boy with mustaches and all that. And then the man who came before, he introduced, these are the Beatles, 1, 2, 3, like that. Then I sat and talked to them for about 15 minutes. And I said, you have created a magic attraction in your name, so you should do something for the youngsters. They said, we want to do, tell us to do, and we'll do. Then I said, first you experience this meditation and then try to become teachers. They said, we'll do everything, we want to experience, tell us now. I said, now it's 12 o'clock, you must be feeling sleepy. I'll be in Wales for 3 days. But I said, you don't have to come there. There are about 20 teachers in London. Here itself you can tell. Then they said, no, they want to learn from me. I said, okay, then come there. Then they followed me. There were some pressmen listening to our talks from behind the curtains. And the news went around the press that the Beatles will be going with Maharishi, go to Wales to start meditation. And it was a long journey, so they took me by train. When I came to the platform, there were about 50 cameras from 50, all the international press were there on the platform. And they said, where are the Beatles? I said, I don't know. Last night they talked to me that they would come with me. They may be in the train or where. And as I proceeded to the compartment, all the press rushed on to the backside. There the Beatles were coming and all that. This was because the English press, being very intelligent, sharp press, they took this opportunity of Beatles following me for a big publicity to change the psychology of the youth. The reason for this worldwide publicity was that deplorable situation in England for the last 8 months. And when English people gave it big headlines, front cover, then the world press followed. This is how came about all this Beatles story in the worldwide interest. It was not the Beatles, but it was the situation in the country. Immediately, in 2-3 days, this Archbishop of Canterbury came out with a statement congratulating Beatles for starting transcendental meditation and all. There were big, huge writings just to change the psychology of the children. And they succeeded greatly. So this was, this phase was behind this worldwide publicity.
Far from the noise and pace of city life, in the cool, clear air of Rishikesh, North India, Pathé News reports from the meditation retreat of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the man who, through transcendental meditation, is currently bringing peace of mind to the Beatles. Flower-loving Yogi told reporters that his brand of peace of mind could only be truly appreciated by intelligent men of the world with rewarding activities and high incomes. Among his most valued disciples were the Beatles, top of the pop pupils. He did his best to keep them away from outsiders, but George had a way for us. Keeping company with himself, it could be part of the treatment, John stalked along the shady paths. Ringo enjoyed the peace of togetherness with Mrs. Ringo. It was a very peaceful scene.
Actress and activist Mia Farrow.
My whole life had fallen apart. You know, I was 21 or something, and I didn't know what to, I'd been on a television series, I'd been married to Frank Sinatra, and I just thought I'd burned all my bridges in this whole country. I couldn't go and work in a library. You know, I was just miserable. So, and I questioned my own religion. I'm Roman Catholic. Couldn't find any solace there. So it was the 60s, you know, so my sister was a big meditator, and is, and she said, you know, we'll go to India and we'll look for, you know, inner peace for you with Maharishi in the Himalayas. I thought, you know, sounds good. 3 weeks I'm trying really hard, and, you know, inner peace just totally eluded me. I'm trying hard, though, and who should arrive but the Beatles, all 4 of them. And next thing I know, there are photographers in the trees, you know, again. And my sister's laughing at me, saying, you know, that's your karma. I gave it another couple of weeks, and this just started hitchhiking, you know, left Prudy there. She was like the all-time meditator. She wouldn't come out of her room. The Beatles wrote a song for her. John Lennon wrote a song called Dear Prudence. It's about Prudence because she wouldn't come out. So that's the story.
And now Mia's sister, a near lifelong Maharishi follower and champion meditator, Prudence Farrow.
Maharishi set it up so that the people who lived in close proximity to each other, 3 or 4 of them, would look after each other. And in my case, I was divided into a group of 3. We were called course buddies. And my course buddies were John and George. After a lecture in the beginning of the course, we would go back to our rooms and discuss together what was covered in the lecture. But of course, we would get into, other subjects of importance to us. What I found when we would have our talks is that John was more of an observer of what George and I would heatedly and passionately discuss. John kept saying, "I'm here because of George." He really admired George. I think he found in George a noble hero. He found somebody who could believe in something as intangible as the human spirit, that spirituality. George believed in that with such passion, and yet it's so intangible, but with such passion that I heard him say several times he wanted to dedicate his life to awakening the world to the deeper values, the more universal values that we share as human beings.
Here, gentle Scottish singer-songwriter Donovan remembers the group's interest in learning the balladeer's complex finger-picking style and how that inspired some of the Beatles' greatest White Album compositions.
John said, how do you do that? I said, well, it's called the claw hammer, and it was invented by Mark Carter in the 1920s. So I said, it's a pattern, but my fingers are doing it without me thinking now. So I said, give me 20 minutes. So I looked at what I was doing in the jungle, and I realized, I remember now how I was taught how to do it myself. And John said, I'd like to learn that. So I didn't know I was introducing to John Lennon and eventually Paul McCartney and George Harrison a genre of music that they'd heard about once when they were playing skiffle. They had played acoustic, a skiffle when they were kids, but I was introducing the sophisticated styles and chord shapes of the country folk and blues. John said, how do you do it? I said, it will take a while. He said, I've got time, Don. Show me how to do it. So we sat there. When I learned it, it took 3 days. A Dirty Hugh taught me, and John got it in 2 days. A whole new set of songs begins when you learn a new style. Paul McCartney wouldn't sit down and learn it. He's very smart, Paul, and he was listening rather than looking, and he picked it up. He would walk around picking it up, and he wrote a whole new set of songs. George was not so interested in the actual technique as he liked the chord shapes that were available from the folk blues jazz world, and especially an A minor descending pattern. That descending pattern was picked up by Paul, George and John very quickly, and songs started pouring out of them, which would be on the White Album. John, especially with Dear Prudence, was using the descending pattern and the finger style. Paul was very sophisticated and used the descending pattern and the style of fingers for Blackbird. But that wasn't the only songs. They wrote others. Julia, John wrote with this style. And then George, he preferred the picking style of Chet Atkins. You hold the guitar pick between your thumb and first finger, and you use the other fingers to move the other strings. That's called the Chet Atkins style. But a lot of guitar players used it because you can use the pick and you can use the fingers. So George liked that. But what he fell in love with was the descending pattern of the A minor form, and wrote an extraordinary song called While My Guitar Gently Weeps. So I didn't know how much they were absorbing of what I'd learned, and I'm so pleased because let's say they were a great watershed in their life, those Beatles. Ringo, on the outside of things, you think he doesn't write songs, you think he doesn't play guitar, but actually he does write songs, and he was picking up a lot too, but he wasn't picking it on the guitar. He was doing other things with drum patterns and such like. And also, he didn't like the tablas so much, although George, when we arrived, brought in sitars, tambura, which is what you call the bass drone of Indian music, and he brought in tablas for Ringo. And so we sat around with these acoustic guitars, and it was almost like we went back to college days or school days, because we were cut off totally from fame and all that. And we needed it, and we learned a lot. And after that, my music also was deepened by meeting them, because the humor in their music affected me tremendously. And so George and I experimented further with sitar. Sean Phillips was my sitar player. But George, learning sitar and listening to Indian music, he developed that crying sound on this guitar, which is so famous now.
On March 26, 1968, Paul McCartney and his girlfriend, actress Jane Asher, left the master's sprawling Rishikesh ashram and returned to London. There they chatted with reporters at Heathrow Airport, commenting on their own magical mystery tour at the feet of the inscrutable Maharishi.
What exactly have you been doing? How do you meditate?
You sit down, you relax, and then you repeat a sound to yourself. And it sounds daft, but it's just a system of relaxation. And that's all it is, there's nothing more to it. So that we meditated for about 5 hours a day in all, sort of 2 hours in the morning and maybe 3 hours in the evening. And then the rest of the time we slept, ate, sunbathed, and had fun,
Ringo Starr came back a bit early, and he described this place as a holiday camp. Would you agree?
Yes. Well, it is a bit like that, I mean, but that's a good description. That's not disparaging.
How much did it cost you?
I don't know. It's very cheap, I mean, it's not like your Hilton hotels.
But the Maharishi has been criticised rather a lot for taking a very commercial outlook.
Yes. But that's got to happen. I mean, people must... Anybody who takes money, people are going to criticise. But every religion or every institution takes money. It's got to have money to keep it going, I mean, he himself has got nothing. He's got a robe, a pair of sandals, and a chair. And he eats nuts and stuff, I mean, he hasn't got a lot of money himself. He doesn't use it on anything. He hasn't got flashy cars or anything. All the money goes to set up academies, that's the whole point of the money. So that, there are a lot of churches in the world far richer and who take more money.
One Indian MP accused this place of being an espionage centre. You, in fact, of being a spy for the West.
Well, don't tell anyone. It's true.
It is.
We're spies, yes. The four of us have been spies. Actually, I'm a reporter, and I joined the Beatles for that very reason. But story's out next week in the paper, which will be nameless.
Jane, did you go for a holiday, or did you go to meditate as well?
Oh, to meditate, yes.
And what effect has it had on you? This presumably is your first big meditation.
I think it calms you down. It's hard to tell because it was so different, life out there. It'll be easier to tell now that I'm back and we're doing sort of ordinary things, to see just what it does.
Isn't this purely an escape from the hurry and scurry of the Western world?
No, it's to train you to be calm in the hurry and scurry. That's the point of it, not to escape it. It's just the opposite.
In this extraordinary piece, John and George hold forth on the delicate mysteries of transcendental meditation in an unaired 1967 London interview.
The only time you're conscious is when you suddenly, it's like you don't know you're awake or something, or sleep till you're awake most of the time. You just hours of sleep before. So you come out of 20 minutes, and sometimes you come out and it's been 20 minutes sitting there. Other time it comes out and it's just, it seems as though no time's gone at all.
You can't really tell anybody what it is because the teaching's all based on the individual experience. Like if you were to do it, then you get instruction which leads to some sort of experience. And upon that experience, you're taught the next part.
It's like trying to tell somebody what chocolate tastes like.
Or to tell somebody how it is to be drunk. They've got to be drunk themselves before they know what it is.
Feel have more knowledge or anything. Or maybe you do. I don't feel that exactly. You just feel more energetic. Just simply for doing work or anything. you just come out of it. I just, whoa, let's get going, you know, it's a real
thing is, it takes a lot of practice to arrive at a point that you can remain there permanently. That's the whole thing. We've only been doing it a matter of 6 weeks, maybe, but there's definite proof I've had that it is something, that it really works. But in actual fact, it'll take a long time to arrive at the point where I'm able to hold that pure consciousness on this level, or to be able to bring that level of consciousness into this level of consciousness.
He said that one of his sort of analogies or whatever is that it's like dipping a cloth into gold. So you dip it in, you bring it out. You dip it in, you bring it out. And if you leave it in, it gets soggy. You know, like if you're sitting in a cave all your life.
If you bring it out, it fades.
And if you bring it out in the sun, it fades. But the meditation thing is going in and going out and going in. So it's when it, after, well, however many years or whatever, when you bring it out, it's the same when it's out as it's in. So when you're doing this, you're really zapping all the time inside. Yeah. But that's...
It's still all on the relative level. Like this sleeping and dreaming and waking, all those three states that people live through is all only relative, which is on this level, whereas this is on a subtler level. And so really you couldn't compare it. With drugs, you do have a glimpse of a few things like that. You could take drugs which should heighten your perception a little, and then maybe to try and get into that subtle level with the drug. But just to take the drug and hope it's going to bring that subtlety onto this gross level is a mistake. You know, it never works.
It is about yourself, you know. You don't find out... I mean, you can find out about other people, but they're only mirrors of yourself anyway. But you find out about yourself, you know, instead of taking 100 years, or maybe you never find out.
People can look at themselves objectively, you know, instead of thinking that you're the big cheese, like people
or even
tend
you're not
to
the
do.
big cheese, whatever you
yeah,
think.
Or whatever you think, you can see yourself from a different point of view. So consequently, it shows you a bit more truth than you've seen. Oh, and of course, truth depends on the person seeing it, but the thing is, you see certain things that have been there all the time, and yet you've lived with such a narrow concept of just general things, just like the trees or the grass or anything. Because the thing is that your true self isn't on this level. Again, it's on a subtler level. So whatever the true self is, the way to approach it is through that meditation or some form of yoga. We're not saying that this meditation is the only answer. It's obviously not. Yoga incorporates lots of different techniques, but the whole point is that each soul is potentially divine. Yoga is a technique of manifesting that, to arrive at that point that is divine.
If you hadn't been cleaning your teeth all your life, it's just suddenly somebody says, it's a good idea if you clean them, so you try it and it seems quite good. You just add it to your routine, you know, so you're just the same, just with the little difference of doing it. You know, it's just like when you add to your religion, you don't have to change your religion or anything. You know, whatever you are, you carry on. You know, I mean, if you ask Maharishi or any of the people, you know, give us a few laws for living by, well, they'd be the same as Christianity. You know, Christianity is the answer as well as this. It's the same thing.
It's the same thing, but through Christianity, how I was taught it, they told me to believe in Jesus and in God and all that. They didn't actually show me any way of experiencing God or Jesus. So the whole point of to believe in something without actually seeing it, well, it's no good. You've got to actually experience the thing. You know, if there's a God, we must see him. And that's the point, you know, the whole thing. It's no good to believe in something, you know, just hallucination.
Well, that bit about the kingdom of heaven is within you, you know, that's all it means, is have a peep inside, you know.
And to
there's no big
it.
scene there or some old fella or, it's still, you know, just like electricity, you don't see it. And still am really a Christian and done this. I know the difference between being 15 and just saying, you know, it's very nice and all that. And had I been taught meditation at 15, now I would be pretty groovy.
I mean, the first concept of a man in the sky, well, I kicked that one a few years ago, but I've got back to that now because it's a man in the sky as well, if you like. It's just everything. The whole thing it's just everything, every aspect of creation
is part of God.
I think of it just
An
like
expression.
a big piece of energy, like electricity or anything, just a bigger piece, a big powerhouse.
And it's the energy that runs through everything, that holds everything together and makes everything one big piece of energy. It's your actions are going to lead to whatever the reaction is. So, and that's the only thing about your attitude to other people. If you treat other people good, they'll treat you good. If you kick them in the face, they probably do the same thing. That's the easiest thing to do with religion, of action and reaction. That's the thing that Christ was saying about what you sow, you reap. Just means whatever you do, you'll get it back. And that's why it doesn't really matter what people say or think, because they'll get it back, just like we'll get back what's coming.
Yes,
so really
that's Old Testament too.
Yeah, well,
it's all the same.
Everything you read about all the religions, they're all the same. It's just a matter of people opening their minds up just to allow that. Yeah, all right, Buddha was a groove, Jesus was all right, and they're all saying exactly the same thing. Maharishi doesn't do miracles, for a kick-off. Superhuman or whatever it is, he is at all. But I mean, Jesus was one of the
divine incarnation, like some of the people, like Christ and Buddha and Krishna and various others, are divine the moment they're born. That is, they've achieved the highest thing and they choose to come back to try and save a few more people, whereas others manage to be born just ordinary and attain the divinity in that incarnation.
So Maharishi's probably one of them, was born quite ordinary, but he's working at it. Well, if everybody was doing it, it'd just be too much.
It's the same thing that Jesus said about go and fix your own house, and everything's fixed up then. If you sort yourself out, everybody was to go home and find out for themselves and fix up all their personal problems, and no other problems exist because they only cause the problems that exist in the world. It's all each person, individual. It's just up to him to do it.
It doesn't matter what you're thinking when you do it. I mean, you can be thinking the most awful things in the world, I suppose. But the point is to get down there, and then you're not thinking anything. It's when you come out you mightn't be thinking quite the same. Or after a few weeks. I mean, we don't really know what happened to a sort of a killer or something that did it. Maybe he changed his mind. We don't know about that. You should have asked him that side of it. But it's for the good, and it's simple. That's the main bit about it. So they're bound to be a bit better than they were, whatever they were before they did it. All you've got to do is be interested in it, whether you're interested in it to knock it or to do anything. But if you just want to try it to find out, that's all you need, Because the fellow that runs it here in London was a real sort of, trying to knock it down for months before he got it. He was a real cynic or whatever you call it. All the differences in Pepper and all that were in retrospect, It wasn't sitting there thinking, oh, we had LSD, so we'll tinkle
Oh,
here.
no. As you look in retrospect at what you did yesterday...
We can't see what we've done now.
I feel that we're all a little more tolerant, but we've been learning that over the last 4 or 5 years. But just lately, I think we are very much more tolerant than we have been. And I hope that we'll get even more tolerant to create more happiness and to fulfill all desires. And I personally think that everybody's going to be here until they have fulfilled all desires. I mean, this gets into other things that may take up hours of argument. But I believe in reincarnation. I mean, it's just something that I feel exists. That what you sow, you reap. So when you die, I mean, life and death are still only relative to thought. There's no such thing, really. Just keep going. I believe in rebirth, and then you come back and go through more experience, and you die, and you come back again, and you keep coming back until you've got it straight. Well, the ultimate thing is to manifest that divinity so that you can become one with the Creator. I mean, it sounds pretty far out, for me to be talking about things like that, but that's just what I believe.
I believe the same. But it's just when we're talking about meditation and that, it's frightening, really, for people who haven't done it or still fancy the meditation, but hear about, coming back and
all that up there. So, I'd sooner put it over and forget all about that. Just to put it over.
Because that's not really important, because this whole point
of
his meditation is for now, because it's now, all the time, it's present, and the past's got nothing to do with it.
Not to live to get into heaven by being a good boy,
but just
or to go to hell. Just to live better as you're living, do whatever you're doing better. You just sort of sit there and you let your mind go, whatever it's going, doesn't matter what you're thinking about. Just let it go. And then you just introduce the mantra or the vibration, just to take over from the thought. You don't will it or use your willpower.
If you find yourself thinking, then at the moment you realize you've been thinking about things again, then you replace that thought with the mantra again. Sometimes you can go on and you find that you haven't even had the mantra in your mind. It's just been complete blank. But when you reach that point, because it's beyond all experience, then it's down there in that level is timeless, spaceless, so you could be there for 5 minutes and come out. You don't actually know how long you've been there, because it's just the actual contact of that, and then coming back out to the gross level, like this level, and you bring that with you.
To promote the release of the Beatles' iconic White Album, Paul McCartney sat down in 1968 and enumerated his thoughts on his contributions to the now beloved double LP, as well as the project in general. Most of the songs, of course, were written at the Maharishi's Rishikesh enclave. Now, Paul's thoughts on the rocking back in the USSR.
Chuck Berry once did a song called Back in the USA, which is very American, very Chuck Berry, very sort of, he was serving in the army, and when I get back home, I'm going to kiss the ground with him, I can't wait to get back to the States. And it's a very American sort of thing, I've always thought, that kind of. So this one is like about, in my mind, it's just about a spy sort of who's been in America a long, long time, some fellow who's been in America a long time, and he's picked up and he's very American, but he gets back to USSR, where, and he's sort of saying, leave it till tomorrow, honey, to disconnect, to disconnect the phone and all that, and come here, honey, and with Russian women and that. You see, what it is, it concerns the attributes of Russian women. Soul element created by George's guitar and heavy brass. Flip side flapper.
McCartney on Oobla Dee, Oobla Da.
I like most kinds of music, so that I haven't got a bag, as they say, except the big black one in the hall outside. And this Oobla Dee, Oobla Da, and USSR and Martha and that, like are three different songs altogether. In fact, all of mine are on the LP. But I can't really say anything about that. I'm pretty diverse. You know what I mean? I haven't got one sort of thing. So this, I've no idea why it's Jamaican or anything.
Remembering Lennon's biting, happiness is a warm gun.
Well, it's I only like to talk about it because I like it, This is a favourite of mine. The idea of the happiness is a warm gun thing is from an advert in an American paper. Where it said, happiness is a warm gun sort of thing, and it was sort of get ready for the long hot summer with a rifle, come and buy them now. It was an advert in a gun magazine, and it was so sick, the idea of come and buy your killing weapons and come and get it. And it was just such a great line, that happiness is a warm gun, that John sort of took that and uses that as a chorus. Yeah. And the rest of the words, I think they're great words, It's a poem. It's a poem, and it finishes off, happiness is a warm gun. Yes, it is.
Here, McCartney discusses the surprising genesis of his infectious Martha, My Dear.
You see, I just start singing some words with the tune, and it just, you know what I mean? I don't ever write a song thinking, now I'll write a song about. I do sometimes, but mainly I don't. And then I'm doing a tune, and then some words come into my head, And these happen to be Martha, My Dear, Although I spend my days in conversation. It doesn't mean anything, But those just happen to come into my head. So that's what this song's about. So it is about my dog.
And now Paul's thoughts on Blackbird, one of his most iconic compositions.
Maybe on Pepper we would have sort of worked on it until we could find some way to put violins or trumpets or something. But I don't think it needs it, this one, it's just, there's nothing to the song. It is just one of those pick it and sing it, and that's it. The only point where we're thinking of putting anything on it is where it comes back in at the end, so it stops and then comes back in. But instead of putting any backing on it, we put a blackbird on it. So there's a blackbird singing at the very end, and somebody said it was a thrush, but I think it's a blackbird.
And what about the Beatles' sardonic cowboy ballad Rocky Raccoon?
I was sitting on the roof in India, just sort of with guitar. John and I were sitting around just playing guitar, and we were with Donovan. And we were just sitting around enjoying ourselves. And I started playing the chords of Rocky Raccoon, just messing around. And originally it was Rocky Sassoon. And then we started making up the words, the three of us, and started just to write them down. They came very quickly. And eventually I changed it from Sassoon to Raccoon, because it sounded more like a cowie. So there it is. It's just, these kind of things, you can't really talk about how they come, because they just come into your head, They really do. And it's like John writing his books, There's no, I don't know how he does it, and he doesn't know how he does it, but he just writes. It's like any writer, I think people who actually do create and write, you tend to read it and think, oh, well, now, how did he do that? But it actually does flow, just flows into their head, into their hand, and they write it down, And that's what happened with this. I don't know anything about the Appalachian Mountains or cowboys and Indians or anything, but I just made it up, And the doctor came in stinking of gin and proceeded to lie on the table. So there you are.
It is well known that the Beatles were open to all musical styles and were proficient in most. Paul opines.
I suppose. It's just that we're not just completely rock and roll. That's what I was trying to say before about Obladi, USSR, birthday. All the different kinds of things. We're not just completely one kind of group. Because like when we played in Hamburg, we didn't just do rock all evening, because we had these, sort of fat old businessmen coming in and saying, or thin old businessmen as well, but coming in and saying, play a mambo. Can you do a rumba? And we couldn't just keep saying no. So we had to get into mambos and rumbas a bit. So that this kind of thing, it's a pretty sort of smoochy ballad. I will. So we have to do that kind of stuff. So we've always played a lot of kind of things, So I don't know if it's getting off the subject, but that's why there's a great variety in this LP, because in our things, in everything we do, we just haven't got one bag, the Beatles, I mean, because on one hand you'll get something like I Will, and then you'll get Why Don't We Do It in the Road, just completely different things, completely different feelings, but it's me singing both of them. It's the same fella, and I wrote both of them, so that you can't explain it. I don't know why I do Why Don't We Do It in the Road, shouting it like that, with a piano and just a rock and roll thing, and then do this sort of smoochy Latin American girl from Ipanema.
Sir Paul explains the creation of the hard-driving Birthday, written at the Maharishi's camp.
The Girl Can't Help It was on television. That's an old rock film. Right. With Little Richard and Fats Domino and Eddie Cochran and a few others, Gene Vincent. And we wanted to see it. So we started recording at 5 o'clock. And we said, well, we'll just do a backing track. We'll make up a backing track. So we kept it very simple, 12-bar blues kind of thing. And we stuck a few bits here and there in it, with no idea what the song was or what was going to go on top of it. We just said, okay, 12 bars in A, then we'll change to D, and then we'll do a few beats in C. We really just did it like that, random thing. And then we came back, because we didn't have time for anything else, and so we just recorded this backing. And we came back here to my house and watched The Girl Can't Help It. Then we went back to the studio again, and then made up some words to go with it all, which were, they say it's your birthday, well, it's my birthday too, yay. And so this song was just made up in an evening. We hadn't ever thought of it before then, and it's one of my favourites, because of that. I think it works, because it's a good one to dance to. Like the big long drum break, but just because instead of, normally we might have sort of 4 bars of drums, but with this we just said, no, keep it going, let's keep it. I like, we all like to hear just drums plodding on. So no more explanation. It's called Birthday.
Remembering Mother Nature's son, a subtle ode to their spiritual master.
Well, it's the same thing again here. We wrote them with guitars, and John, on a lot of his, John picks the guitar, because he learned off Donovan when we were in India. Donovan showed him how to finger pick. So he sort of stuck it in everything then. And while he was learning finger picking, I was sort of playing acoustic as well, acoustic guitar. So that's it. That's why they crept in like this. We decided not to try and cover them up with it like we might do normally, and just use the acoustic guitar instead of, say, a piano or an electric guitar or anything. So the only thing about this one, however, says, born a poor young country boy. And I was born in Walton Hospital, actually, so it's a dirty lie.
Perhaps the heaviest tune on the album is Helter Skelter, McCartney recalls.
Well, the only ones I'm commenting on are the ones I sort of wrote or have a lot to do with. It's because I don't want to go commenting on John's songs in case I'm wrong, because he wrote them, most of them. So I don't really want to go into... Anyway, Helter Skelter, that came about just because I'd read a review of a record where it said, and this group, it was about some group, I can't remember, saying, and this group really goes wild, and they just, this like echo on everything, they're screaming their heads off. And I just remember thinking, it'd be great to do one like that. The pity they've done it, must be great, really screaming record. And then I heard their record, and it was quite straight, and it was very sophisticated. It wasn't rough and screaming and tape echo at all. So I thought, we'll do one like that then. And I had this song called Helter Skelter, which is just a ridiculous song.
Finally, Paul remembers the inception of the engaging 1920s-inspired Honey Pie.
Well, I like, my dad's always sort of played fruity old songs like that. And I like them. I like the melody of old songs. And the lyrics as well, there's some old lyrics like, sort of a woman singing about a man, and she's saying, something about, I want to have his initial on my monogram. So, you know what I mean? Yeah. Just good lyrics and just good thoughts that you don't sort of hear so much these days, And so, I would quite like to have been sort of a 1920s writer, because I like that thing, the top hat and tails and sort of coming on to this kind of number. I like that thing. But, so this is just me doing it, pretending I'm living in 1925.
Part 2. Who was that woman who looked like Jean Simmons who kept going to Maharishi for private interviews? She must have been about 45. I was always trying to get an audience with the Maharishi, and he kept refusing. The rest of us had to wait like good American people in line to see the master walking on the petals. John Lennon. When Ringo comes, the storm clears the passage. In the clear, Ringo comes. Maharishi. Reporter. Do you really feel this man is on the level? John Lennon. I don't know what level he's on. Born in Jalabapur, India in 1918, the son of a school teacher, Mahesh Prasad Varma graduated from Allahabad University with a physics degree in 1942. He soon abandoned his worldly aspirations, however, and according to his official biography, spent the next 13 years living the life of a Hindu ascetic, uncovering the delicate mysteries of meditational yoga. During that time, he took initiation from his spiritual master, His Holiness Brahmalin Jadguru Sankaracharya Brahmananda Saraswati Maharaj, or to his followers, simply Gurudev. Following his master's death, Varma apparently bestowed upon himself the name Reverend Maharishi Bala Brahmachari Mahesh Yogi Maharaj, an unheard-of title for a mere ashram clerk. Beyond that, he publicly assumed the position of successor to his guru. Officials of the Orthodox Hindu society from which he sprang believed that he was wildly unsuited for the post, as he had been born into the Kshatriya caste, warrior governmental class, and argued that he was also ineligible according to the last will and testament of Brahmananda Saraswati. In 1985, Robert Kopinski, a former follower of the Maharishi, met in India with Gurudev's successor, Sri Sankaracharya Swarupanand Saraswati, to try to shed some light on the Maharishi's lightning rise to international prominence. If he is a follower of the Sanatana Dharma Hinduism, he should not do what he is doing, the aged master began. This would be against the orders of his guru. Moreover, calling himself Maharishi, a great saint, is totally inappropriate. No assembly has conferred upon him that title. In the ashram he was doing the work of typing, writing, and translation. Then he became a sadhu. He went abroad, first to Singapore. The expat community there of Indians was thinking he was a disciple of Sankaracharya and received him, bought him a ticket for the United States, and off he went. After going to America, he brought the Beatles back here. It was rumors he did inappropriate things with them, and that's why they went away. He later opened many camps and claimed he could teach people to read minds and levitate. No one, however, succeeded in learning the things he promised. He himself does not know how to practice yoga. He does not know anything about such things. He used to place a picture of Gurudev behind him, and during initiation he would have people worship it, then he would give out mantras. I have met many persons who in reality had their mantras from Mahesh, but they consider themselves to be disciples of Gurudev. But no matter whom they consider to be their teacher, because the fact is, he who gives a mantra is to be considered the real guru. If Mahesh thinks he is backed by Sankaracharya, then it is proper on his part to tell people to take initiation from Sankaracharya. I believe Mahesh has caused a severe blow to genuine Indian culture. Professional jealousy from a less commercially successful guru, or indeed legitimate criticism from the spiritual organization the Maharishi once represented. Cynthia Lennon comes down on the side of the old master. A decade after the Beatles met the Maharishi, she wrote, "I believed then, and I believe now, that the Maharishi is a very wise and beautiful being. The press of the world took great delight in trying to belittle him, but their judgment was not founded on the experience of his teaching. No matter what anyone says about the Maharishi, he has always worked for the betterment of mankind, and if one can even partially succeed in a single lifetime, then as far as I'm concerned, he is worthy of praise, not degradation or insult." Whatever the case, in 1959 he traveled west and established the International Meditation Society, then known as the Beacon Light of the Himalayas. He landed in Hollywood, where he set up his own spiritual regeneration movement on a sunny summer afternoon in Sequoia National Park. To his 20 or 30 followers, the Maharishi spoke of a time when there would be spiritual regeneration centers in every major city of the world, and millions would embrace the technique of meditation. Once Maharishi was involved with the Beatles, however, he became a household name the world over. He appeared on the Johnny Carson show, exchanging roses with Merv Griffin, his smiling face on the covers of the Saturday Evening Post, Esquire, Newsweek, Life, Look, and he toured with the Beach Boys and even played Madison Square Garden. When veteran journalist Louis Lapham asked one of the Guru's senior American aides about the financial side of the Maharishi's international movement, the man answered coyly, "The Maharishi has a head for just about anything he needs a head for." When he was told he was sending too much money out of India, he simply set up companies in America and Switzerland to circumvent the problem. He homed in on U.S. college campuses as recruiting grounds and did equally well there. In the beginning, it cost only $35 to receive a mantra from the Maharishi, but rumor has it that he requested the Beatles to deposit some 10 to 25% of their annual income into a Swiss account in his name. Lennon, for one, was not having that. Bill Harry, a friend of the Beatles, has written, "He seemed to act as if he didn't understand business affairs, but always had an accountant present at his meetings. When traveling, he always stayed at the very best hotels." The Beatles' aide-de-camp Peter Brown remembers his dealings with the Guru. "I had my doubts about the efficacy of the Beatles going off with Maharishi in the middle of the formation of Apple, particularly because of incidents which led me to believe Maharishi was using the Beatles' name for personal gain. One day I received a call from lawyers from ABC Television in America. They said the Maharishi was negotiating a TV special which would include an appearance by the Beatles. They were calling to confirm the Beatles' cooperation. I told them in no uncertain terms that the Beatles had no intention whatsoever of appearing on the Maharishi's show. Only a week later, the lawyers were back on the phone. The Maharishi was still insisting that he could deliver the Fab Four. I called the Maharishi in Malmö, Sweden, and explained the problem, but his answers were obscure and indefinite. I then decided to fly to Malmo to insist that he should not represent the Beatles as being part of his projects. The Maharishi greeted me warmly, but only giggled and nodded as I laid down the law. Later, the lawyers, who said the Maharishi was still insisting the Beatles would appear, were soliciting sponsors with this understanding. I went to Malmo yet again, this time with Paul and George. We met the Maharishi and tried to explain that he must not use their names to exploit his business, and they definitely would not appear on his TV special. But the Maharishi only nodded and giggled. "He's not a modern man," George said forgivingly on the plane home. "He just doesn't understand these things." In Bangor, back in August 1967, the Maharishi extended an open invitation to the boys and their entourage to travel to his International Academy of Transcendental Meditation in Rishikesh, India, to take part in his Advanced Teachers Training Program. Thus, on 14 February 1968, Mal Evans packed up the Beatles' luggage from their homes and boarded Qantas Flight 754 from Heathrow to New Delhi. John, Cynthia, George, Patty and her sister Jenny flew in the next day. Evans recalled, traveling from London with John and George were two reporters, Robin Turner of the Daily Express and Don Short of the Daily Mirror. Convinced them on the plane just by chatting of the value of meditation. At 8:15 a.m. on Friday morning, George, John, Patty, Sin, and Jenny arrived. There to meet them and say hello was Mia Farrow. I'd already introduced myself back at the hotel and found out her brother Johnny was due to fly in about the same time as the two Beatles. Getting away from the airport wasn't too difficult because the press were quite polite and didn't detain anyone too long. However, the Beatles' entourage did not reach Rishikesh without incident, as Lapham remembered. Harrison and Lennon arrived over the weekend. The Indian press pursued them to the ashram, and there were several unpleasant incidents. A photographer was assaulted, and the editorials the next day reflected a general bitterness and dissolution. Apple bigwigs Neil Aspinall and Dennis O'Dell had come with John and George, as well as Magic Alex, Paul, Jane Asher, Ringo, Maureen, and a few members of the British press corps arrived at the Maharishi's comfortable mountain retreat late on 19 February. Across the path, a banner strung between bamboo poles bore the single word, "Welcome." Just beyond, where the path turned steeply upward, a stern guard stood before a wooden gate and a barbed wire fence. The buildings at the higher elevation stood amongst shisham and teak trees, but those below the gate were erected on open, stony ground. Evans later revealed that the Beatles were all relieved to discover the many amenities available to them in what was literally the Indian jungle. Having heard a mixture of strange stories about the place, I think we all half expected to find ourselves living in tents with cardboard boxes for seats and tables, but we had a very pleasant surprise when we saw the high standard of the accommodations. "Rishikesh is an incredible place," Harrison said. 90% of the population are renunciates. Starr began to feel unwelcome on his first day, as Evans recalled. When he got the chance, Ringo told me he needed a doctor. It wasn't anything serious, but his injections were giving him trouble. His arm was swollen and painful, and he thought it best to see if any treatment was required. Our driver lost his way and led us to a dead end in the middle of a field. The press came to our rescue, as a whole stream of cars had been following us. In the end, we accepted the directions of some helpful reporters and found a hospital. A doctor assured Ringo all would be well without treatment. Everyone relaxed as the initial excitement of the trip subsided and tensions dissipated under the spell of meditation. Surprisingly, most days it was the normally sluggish John who was first up, and after half an hour's meditation he would go for a leisurely stroll around the compound with Evans and George. We lived in one of 6 little cottages, Evans recalled. They had been luxuriously done out. Each one of our rooms was neatly furnished with twin beds, new rugs, dressing tables, shelves and cupboards, a bathroom, and toilet and shower facilities. The water supply broke down from time to time, both hot and cold. Surprise, surprise, not a single creepy-crawly thingy in sight. So much for all the soft rumors that we'd heard in London before we set off. The Maharishi was a wonderful teacher, says Cynthia. His lectures were humorous, enlightening, and provided truly halcyon days. John and George were in their element. They threw themselves totally into the Maharishi's teachings, were happy, relaxed, and above all, found a peace of mind denied them so long. Harrison recalled that quite a lot of what the Guru said went directly into their music. There was a lot of things that was actually stuff the Maharishi had said, like the song Come On, Come On, Come On, Come On, It's Such a Joy, whatever that song was, everybody's got something to hide except for me and my monkey. Well, apart from the bit about the monkey, that was what the Maharishi used to always say, Come on, come on. McCartney, too, became absorbed in the master's philosophy, but Starr didn't like the food or the insects and complained that the stifling midday heat stopped him from meditating properly. Ringo, an only marginally interested convert, found some of the curry dishes a bit hot, said Evans. Too many spices. So when I went into Delhi, I collected a good supply of eggs so that we would have plenty of alternative fried eggs, boiled eggs, poached eggs, you name it. To eat communally overlooking the Ganges was a far cry from bacon and eggs in Surrey, Cynthia recalled. A wooden trellis canopy over the dining area, entwined with creepers, sheltered us from the weather during the first weeks of the cold and rain. Although our diet in India contained no meat, none of us suffered. The simple life suited us all. We thrived and began to evolve more as individuals without all the stress and pressure. Lapham remembered his initial impressions of the entourage and the lousy food. The Beatles first appeared towards the end of lunch and the beginning of tea. Dressed in romantic combinations of mod and Indian costumes, they came as a group, accompanied by their wives, also in vivid trailing silk. They moved slowly, their heavy golden chains and pendants swinging against their chests, and the girls, all of whom had long blonde hair, evoked images of maidens rescued from castles. Collectively, they looked like characters from a strange and wonderful movie as yet unseen. They sat in a row on one side of the table, and Paul McCartney said he'd had a dream to Annalise Braun, an elfin woman to whom everyone applied on such matters. He explained that in his dream he'd been trapped in a leaking submarine of indeterminate color. When all appeared lost, however, the sub surfaced in a crowded London street. Annalise clapped her hands like a child seeing its first snowfall. "How very nice," she said, wondering if McCartney understood. He smiled and said he didn't think he quite got it. "Why," she said, "it's the perfect meditation dream. The voyage is the submarine," she interpreted, as the descent towards pure consciousness through the vehicle of the mantra, the leaks represented anxiety, and the emergence in the street indicated a return to normal life, which was the purpose of all good and true meditation. The other people present applauded, and in the ensuing silence at the far end of the table I heard somebody say, "I'm sure it's Wednesday, but they're trying to convince me that it's actually Sunday." Another of the lauded pop star elite to join the Beatles on their pilgrimage to inner peace was the Scottish singer-songwriter Donovan. He remembered a happy time full of promise, and the youthful hope that was taking place on that lonely mountain was somehow of near universal importance. "One night we were in the Maharishi's room," he said. The Maharishi was sitting on the floor cross-legged. There were 4 Beatles, Mia Farrow, Mike Love of the Beach Boys, and myself, and there was a sort of embarrassed silence. I think we didn't quite know what we were expected to say or do, because this sort of thing was obviously all very new to us. To break the mood, John went up to the Maharishi, patted him on the head, and said, "There's a good little guru." It worked. We all laughed. That gesture was very typical of Lennon, because he always said and did exactly whatever he felt. A sparkly young nurse from the USA was at Rishikesh at the same time, more to hang out with the Beatles than for the wisdom of the Maharishi. Meditator Mike Dolan recalled, "My next-door neighbor in the ashram was a feisty New Yorker in her late 20s whom I will call R.B. She was perkily attractive, very funny, and at times combative. She would interrupt Maharishi with pointedly uncosmic questions during his lectures. She was, as a lot of people on that course, a recent convert to meditation, one of the sudden influx of Beatle fans. It seemed to hit her all of a sudden that this technique was more of a part of a greater Hindu tradition than she had ever expected. She was having trouble as the lectures delved more and more into Vedic philosophy. I believe she felt deceived by the movement. She was friendly, but soon became very negative towards meditation in general. She wanted so badly to just go home, but her plane ticket was dated for the end of the 3-month course, so she was forced to stay at the ashram for weeks. R.B. soon found a friend, however, in Magic Alex. She soon stopped attending the lectures weeks before, and she stayed in her room with Alex as he made plans for his revolutionary power pack. I could hear them through the thin wall, huffing and puffing away as they practiced their asanas late at night. It most certainly behooved R.B. and Alex to get out of Rishikesh, but he couldn't leave without losing face. Magic was under some pressure from his friends' bosses to actually produce something. If he were to stay in Rishikesh, he would be exposed as a fraud. The familiar smell of happy herbs was sometimes wafted out of the open door, and their behavior was becoming notorious, especially with the older establishment meditators like Walter Koch, Nancy Koch, and the newly arrived president of SRM, the Spiritual Regeneration Movement, Charles Lutz. One of those who perhaps went a little too far with her cosmic homework was Prudence Farrow, Mia's sister, who was spending hour after hour, day after day, alone in her cottage, apparently in deep meditation. Now this was all well and good for the more seasoned practitioner, but not for a rank beginner. Her concerned friends decided that something had to be done. All the people around her were very worried about the girl, said Lennon, so we sang to her. The spiritually polar opposite to Farrow was the always affable Jane Asher. Canadian ashram inmate Paul Saltzman remembered. Jane was the warmest, most emotionally open of any of the famous folks who spent parts of each day sitting outside at the table overlooking the Ganges and the town of Rishikesh far below. Now that the whole world knew where the Beatles were, fan mail poured in, and some lucky correspondents actually received a reply. I found a copy of this letter from John to a fan in a diary while researching this book. Dear Beth, thank you for your letter and kind thoughts. When you read that we are in India searching for peace, etc., it is not that we need faith in God and Jesus. We have faith in them. It is only as if you went to stay with Billy Graham for a short time. It just so happens that our guru or teacher is Indian, and what is more natural for us to come to India or his home. He also holds courses in Europe and America, and we will probably go to some of them as well, to learn and to be near him. A newspaper cutting from the now long-defunct Dehradun Dispatch was with the letter. A meditation celebration. Meditating with the Maharishi had its lighter moments for the Beatles. Rishikesh. You'd be forgiven for thinking every day's a birthday for the Beatles, but no Beatle has ever had quite such a birthday party as George Harrison's 25th, which he celebrated during his meditational sessions in India. Apparently George hadn't given much thought to his birthday, probably thinking it would be spent in meditation, but the Maharishi, a quiet expert in showmanship, had some surprises up his sleeve. He had the assembly hall decked with everything colorful that could be found, flags, curtains, yards of silk, so that it looked more like a theater than a scene for a party. The timing of the fair was beautiful. When everyone was seated, the Maharishi entered with his priests and sat cross-legged on a deerskin rug beneath the portrait of his guru. A real Rishikesh rave-up followed, with the chanting of hymns and the waving of burning oil lamps. Fashion note for would-be meditators, the shoeless Beatles and their girls were resplendent in Raja coats, saris, and silk trousers, all looking very tanned and dressed up for the occasion. A sort of say-it-with-flowers ceremony followed. Firstly, the Maharishi garlanded George, then George returned the gesture. Then the whole audience garlanded both George and Patty with floral sprays of yellow marigolds, yellow apparently being an auspicious color for the event. George carried on from there by garlanding the necks of his fellow Beatles and their wives. When it came to Mal Evans, however, chaos developed. The garland around Mal's neck caught on one of George's, leaving them twisting and wriggling around the stage to free themselves, the whole place roaring with laughter. Mike Love, leader of the Beach Boys, who was in the audience, was then asked up on stage to speak about meditation. Finally, the Maharishi gave George his birthday present. It was a plastic globe of the world, a simple present, but actually full of meaning. The globe had been fitted so that the map of the world was upside down. This is what the world is like today. Upside down, the Maharishi announced solemnly. It is rotating in tension and agony. The world waits for its release and to be put right. Transcendental meditation can do so. George, this globe I am giving you to symbolize the world today. I hope you will help us all in the task of putting it right." Accepting the globe from the Maharishi, George immediately turned it over so that the map was right side up. "I've done it," he shouted, and was applauded with laughter for his quick wit. Everyone finally moved outside for a fireworks display, and as the Maharishi left, the Beatles bowed and folded their heads, murmuring, "Namaste." A long-lost diary, written in Hindi and Nepalese by one of the sannyasis or renunciates, His Holiness Ravinda Damodar Swami, a younger godbrother of the Maharishi, was given to me in Rishikesh. The humble document throws considerable light on events. A note: the diary was written in Indian-tainted English. Wednesday, 2 p.m. This afternoon Maharishi held press conference below gate. In the morning, boys set up asan and antelope skin. For the reporters they spread mats. Walking slowly, followed by 2 monks, he came from the hill carrying marigolds. The taller monk held an umbrella over his head, shading him from the sun. The pressman asked him about the difference between his teachings and Vedic renunciation. Plucking petals from a flower, Maharishi said that Vedanta and yoga had been misinterpreted for many years. The tall monk held the umbrella, raising and lowering it as the photographers stood up to take pictures. The smaller monk squatted at Maharishi's feet, holding out the microphone of his tape recorder. A man who came from South India asked if he could read a poem. Maharishi nodded, and the man read in Tamil. When he finished, he kissed Maharishi's feet, saying in English he hoped to sit at the Maharishi's feet in heaven. Maharishi asked if anyone had seen the article about him in Life magazine. Nobody had seen it. "Too bad," he said. "Huge picture." Although there were many questions from reporters, I thought to write down only a bit of what was said. Reporter: "What success have you had here in India?" Maharishi: "The Indian people are poor and lazy, and meditation will give them the energy and drive to work harder and better themselves." Reporter: "But surely poverty is not a simple matter of laziness." Maharishi: "With meditation they will overcome their poverty." Reporter: "What do you think about American young people?" Maharishi: "They should stay at school and obey their parents, and they must obey the leaders of their country who are more informed and qualified than they. I disagree with nuclear disarmament, but feel America was right to be in Vietnam." Friday, 11 p.m. I don't like the Greek, Mardas. He doesn't care for meditation or Gurudev. He only cares Beatles and girls. He drank wine and gave to others. He has a girl in his room. Behind the back I saw him make funny faces at Maharishi. No one laughed. He also eats chicken, which is against the rules of Rishikesh. How he got it, I do not know. During lectures he does not come or just pretends to listen. He does not meditate. He is a bad influence on all Westerners. He is a very, very bad man. Maharishi also doesn't like him, but he cannot do anything because he is the Beatles' good friend. He tried to touch one Indian lady who ran away. Only I saw. He is bad. Saturday, 9 a.m. Nice meeting with all at camp and Gurudev. Maharishi makes everyone laugh. He likes Ringo very much. He says Ringo is always in meditation, but the others, too much brain in the way. Ringo goes by feeling and heart. Wife is also nice. She is a very good artist. Boss Beatle John is funny, but sometimes mean to his wife, who is a nice lady. George is my favorite. He is the most kind to all. I do not know his wife, but she smiles and is polite. Donovan is also good, but smokes cigarettes. I tell him no, but he says he cannot stop. Meditation will help him. Sometimes Paul talks mean with George. He is clever, but over-smart. He wants to be the boss of the Beatles, I know. He also a funny man and writes good songs. The girl Jane seems afraid of India. She is quiet. Maharishi tries to encourage her, but she has no real interest, I think. Today we will walk by the river together, all the Westerners and Guru Maharaj. I must go to Rishikesh for sweaters for the Farrow sisters. They complain of cold mornings. Bananas, mangoes, agabati, and tea also, not to forget. Sunday,
2:30 p.m. I visit Maharishi's house for kitchen work. He tells me of all of the Beatles George is most advanced, and this is his last life. He also says John has many more to go and must not give in to his weakness for women or it will ruin him. I will have to work quietly while he takes a nap, something I have never seen him do.
John, Paul, George, and Ringo went to Rishikesh hoping to further their studies in meditation and relieve the demands of fame. In the long run, however, the journey was far more valuable to John and Paul in terms of their songwriting and forthcoming album. Even with meditation on their minds, the Beatles were never without their music. John, Paul, George, and Ringo went to Rishikesh hoping to further their studies in meditation and relieve the demands of fame. In the long run, however, the journey was far more valuable to John and Paul in terms of their songwriting and their forthcoming album. Even with meditation on their minds, the Beatles were never without their music. John and Paul came with their Martin D28 acoustic guitars, and George instructed Mal Evans to go to Ricky Ram's in Connaught Place in Delhi and buy him the finest instrument in stock. Popmaster Donovan, too, became an important, if unacknowledged, musical presence for the Beatles, giving them valuable feedback on the constant flow of fleeting ideas and co-authoring some central elements to their new music. His first major contribution was to teach Lennon a distinctive guitar-picking style. Once John had mastered it, he passed it on to George. It proved a valuable tool for John, who wrote Dear Prudence, and Julia utilizing it. Dear Prudence was written for Prudence Farrow. When she went over the top with her meditating, as Lennon later put it, he and George were elected to coax her outside, and John wrote the song. Prudence remembered George telling her that John had written a song about her, but I didn't hear about it until it came out on the album. I was very flattered. It was a beautiful thing to have done. Her sister Mia remembered that in response to several frightening emotional responses which occurred during the long hours of meditation, Maharishi appointed sets of team buddies to look out for one another. Prudence buddies were George and John, and they took their responsibilities seriously. Every morning and most afternoons they met in Prudy's room, where they discussed their respective lives, the meaning of existence, and who the Maharishi really was. Before they left the ashram, Lennon and McCartney wrote the song Dear Prudence for my sister. Dear Prudence, won't you come out to play? Dear Prudence, greet the brand new day. I guess I thought it was really nice, but I didn't really know that they were going to put it on an album or anything, said Prudy. I didn't really think about it. It wasn't anything in my mind. Then much later, after India, I heard people saying that there was a song. I was really grateful that it was something so nice. I just wanted to meditate as much as possible, Prudence told me. It was a special time and such a holy place. One night when I was meditating, George and John came into my room with their guitars singing Oobla-dee, Oobla-da, Life Goes On. Another time, John and Paul came in singing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the whole song. They were trying to be cheerful, and it was so sweet of them. I was grateful, but I wished they'd go away. At first, I don't think they realized what the training course in meditation was all about. They were just having fun. They didn't quite understand until later. In John's mind, Julia was a song about two people, his late free-spirited mother Julia and Yoko Ono. Lennon had first met Ono at an exhibition of hers at the Indica Gallery in London, 1966. By the spring of 1968, he had begun to exchange passionate letters with the Japanese-American artist. He was interested in producing an album by Yoko. I was in India meditating about the album, thinking about what would be the best LP cover, when it suddenly hit me. I thought, aha, naked, so I wrote Yoko with a drawing. This idea went on to become the cover of their first collaboration, the infamous Two Virgins. John snapped the photo himself in Ringo's basement apartment in London. In Julia, Yoko was the ocean child, the meaning of her name in Japanese. The reference to seashell eyes is lifted from Kahlil Gibran's poem Sand and Foam. The song is the only number in the entitled Beatles catalog performed entirely solo by Lennon.
Paul first showed John the chorus to Oobla-dee, Oobla-da in Rishikesh, and the two played the chorus over and over while McCartney wrote the lyrics for the convoluted storyline. The title phrase was Yoruba, for life goes on, and was first tossed at Paul by Nigerian conga player Jimmy Scott in London. Although Scott later played congas on an early version of the song, his relationship with McCartney was not always cordial. He believed he deserved a small cut of the song's royalties, having written the catchphrase. Paul was angered by the British press for taking Scott's side and complained to the other Beatles in 1969 about a particular article. It just says, currently Lennon and McCartney are doing quite well out of a riff they borrowed from Jimmy Scott. Oobla-dee, Oobla-da, which is topping the charts. Cunts. I mean, you haven't got a riff when you say, hello, that's the riff I got off Jimmy Scott. These two words, fucking hell, you'd really think we'd taken his life. It's not as though he wrote the song. Subsequently, McCartney bailed Scott out of jail via Appleman Alistair Taylor. The musician had been arrested for failing to pay alimony, and eventually the pair were reconciled. Meanwhile, Richard Cook's visit to his mother Nancy in Rishikesh inspired in Lennon the continuing story of Bungalow Bill. Mother and son went off on a tiger hunt, and afterwards Cook explained to John and Paul why the animal had been killed. It was either the tiger or us. The tiger was standing right in front of us. This became the lyric. If looks could kill, it would have been us instead of him. To John, the song was a sort of teenage social commentary and a bit of a joke. Today it's a sneaky anthem for animal rights. But it was written at a time when such matters were thought either eccentric or foolishly sentimental. Meanwhile, Donovan had his eye on Jenny Boyd, Petty Harrison's younger sister, and wrote Jennifer Juniper for her, but she wasn't really interested in him and spent a lot of time with John. He was suffering from insomnia and turned to songwriting to get him through the hot nights. His compositions, such as I'm So Tired, reflected his often dark, surly moods, Jenny remembered. When I was at my lowest, he made a drawing of a turbaned Sikh genie holding a big snake and intoning, by the power within and the power without, I cast your tonsil lighthouse out. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear John singing those sad songs he wrote during those long, lonely evenings. Lennon was aware of the irony in trying to ascend to God through meditation while producing suicidal songs. It was that period when I was going through what's it all about. Songwriting is nothing, it's pointless. I'm not really talented, and I'm shit. I couldn't do anything but be a Beatle, and what am I doing about it? The self-doubt that had manifested in the Sgt. Pepper period remained. The Maharishi told him repeatedly that the ego could be a positive force if kept in perspective, but he believed that I'd really be destroyed if I was paranoid and weak. I couldn't do anything. Your blues reflected this. Here Lennon's loneliness and despair were real, not masked by third-person imagery. A parody of the emerging English blues scene in London, Your Blues was about the end of his marriage. He also came up with a statement against the Vietnam War, a song called simply Revolution. I still had this God will save us feeling about it, that it's going to be all right. That's why I did it. I wanted to say my piece about revolution. He originally envisioned it as a faster number, but when he took it into the studio, it was slowed down and usable as a single. The initial recording, though, formed the basis of two songs on the Beatles' White Album, Revolution No. 1 and Revolution No. 9. The original faster version was later used as the B-side of the smash, Hey Jude. Lennon was frustrated by not having a piano on which to compose, even though his skill on the instrument was limited. However, several of his newest songs were piano-based, including Hey Bulldog, Across the Universe, and Cry Baby Cry, which had been in his head for months. It had come from a TV advert, Cry Baby Cry, Make Your Mother Buy. In India, he reworked the idea on acoustic guitar and added several new lyrics based in part on the nursery rhyme Sing a Song of Sixpence. He used a similar source for What's the New Mary Jane, a wild Lennon-Magic Alex collaboration which drew from the A. Milne poem What is the Matter with Mary Jane. Later, the song, an unmelodious number featuring Yoko's wailing vocals, caused tensions between John and Paul, and the latter did not participate in the recording. It was summarily dropped from the White Album, and Lennon attempted to recycle it as a Plastic Ono Band single, but it remained unreleased until the Beatles anthology in 1996. Inspired by Chuck Berry's Back in the USA, McCartney composed the clever story of a Cold War spy returning home from America and back in the USSR. One morning at the breakfast table, he sang it to Mike Love, who suggested mentioning girls from various parts of Russia, such as the Ukraine, Georgia, and Moscow, in the lyrics. Love's presence at the ashram perhaps sparked in Paul the idea of using a Beach Boys-style harmony in the recording. McCartney's Martha My Dear was made up of two pieces, Martha My Dear and Silly Girl. It's about my dog, he said in 1968. I don't ever try to make a serious social comment, so you can read anything you like into it, but it's really just a song. It's me singing to my dog. Sitting on the roof of one of the chalets, Paul introduced the chords of Rocky Sassoon to John and Donovan. All three, equipped with their acoustic guitars, composed the lyrics, and McCartney wrote them down. He changed Sassoon to Raccoon for a more cowboy-sounding name, and likened the song to a one-act play. I don't know anything about the Appalachian Mountains, cowboys, and Indians or anything. I just made it all up. At this point, Paul only had the melody of I Will. In McCartney's words, it was a sort of smoochy ballad that was entitled Ballad until suitable lyrics were found. He tried writing some with Donovan using Maharishi-inspired imagery, but in the end adopted his own straightforward love lyrics, which he finished on his return to England. I don't think I helped with the lyrics at all, says Donovan. He is very productive and will always take over writing in a jam. I may have helped him shape some of the chords and encourage the imagery from tunes that I wrote in India. The descending movements of my songs may have encouraged Paul to write somewhat differently. Wild Honey Pie, meanwhile, came from a spur-of-the-moment sing-along at the ashram. Two other acoustic-driven numbers, Junk and Teddy Boy, ended up on his first solo album, McCartney. Lennon also wrote the plaintive Look at Me, which he kept for his own Plastic Ono Band album. He also produced two throwaways, as he termed them, which found their way onto the medley on side 2 of Abbey Road. Mean Mr. Mustard, a song inspired by a newspaper article about this mean guy who hid 5-pound notes, not up his nose, but somewhere else. And Polythene Pam, about a girl who dressed in polythene, although she didn't wear jackboots and kilts. I just sort of elaborated, perverted sex in a polythene bag. I was just looking for something kinky to write about. Monkeys mating in the open inspired Paul's Why Don't We Do It in the Road? That's how simple the act of procreation is. We have horrendous problems with it, and yet animals don't. Lennon's Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey was just a nice line which I made into a song. It was a reference to his new relationship with Ono, with filler line from the Maharishi's daily lectures. Some of these same words form the basis for McCartney's Cosmically Conscious, which was not released until it closed off his 1993 album, Off the Ground. According to Mal Evans, he turned up in one of Paul's dreams in Rishikesh saying, "Let it be." McCartney was struck by this and wrote a song around the phrase in late 1968 at home in Cavendish Avenue. Driving around London one afternoon, he asked Evan if he minded that Brother Malcolm be changed to Mother Mary. Mal had no objection. Paul, however, occasionally slipped in Brother Malcolm during the extended get-back rehearsals of 1969. In his own recollections after Evan's death, McCartney said the source of his inspiration was a dream about his mother Mary. Many evenings in Rishikesh were spent in a large hall where the Maharishi would sit on a platform to lecture, and occasionally mini-concerts took place. At one point, Paul, George, and Donovan composed a spontaneous tribute to him. When the sun is tucked away in bed, you worry about the life you've led. But there is only one thing to do. Let the Maharishi lead you. The song then ended with a quiet incantation of Maharishi. The Maharishi's lively lectures were another source of inspiration for the new Beatles music. A talk on nature motivated John to write Child of Nature, a song much like Across the Universe, with its wistful, poetic lyrics. When he became disillusioned with the Rishikesh experience, however, he changed the setting from Rishikesh to Marrakesh. The song was abandoned and never seriously rehearsed, but it resurfaced with new words on John's 1971 Imagine album as Jealous Guy. Paul was inspired by the selfsame talk to write Mother Nature's Son at his father's home Rembrandt, combining the Maharishi's wisdom with childhood memories of bicycle rides in the English countryside. The only thing about this one, however, is that it says, "Born a poor young country boy," and I was born in a private ward in Woolton Hospital, actually, so it's a dirty lie. The last thing George Harrison wanted to do in Rishikesh was write, and he admonished Paul for even thinking of the next album, tentatively entitled Umbrella, at this point, and then later, A Doll's House. He wrote a verse for Donovan's Hurdy-Gurdy Man, which was eventually left off the final recording. When truth gets buried deep beneath 1,000 years of sleep, time demands a turnaround, and once again the truth is found. He also wrote Sour Milk Sea, later recorded by Apple artist Jackie Lomax, in about 10 minutes. Even though I was in India, I always imagined the song as rock and roll. That was the intention. He began the sleepy Long, 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 but finished it later in England, using chords from Bob Dylan's Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. Literary influence was the key to George's work in this period, and most of his White Album contributions came from his reading in England. His major composition in India was Dehradun, co-written with Donovan, about a sleepy mountain town some 25 miles northwest of Rishikesh. He attempted to record it during sessions for All Things Must Pass, but it remains officially unreleased. Maureen and Ringo were the first in the Beatles party to leave on 1 March. If anyone thought that he was leaving so early because he was now anti-meditation, Ringo dispelled the idea when he reached Britain. The Academy is a great place, and I really enjoyed it a lot. I still meditate every day for half an hour in the morning and half an hour every evening, and I think I'm a better person for it. I'm far more relaxed than I have ever been. If you're working very hard and things are a bit chaotic, you get all tensed up and screwed up inside. You feel as if you have to break something or hit someone, but if you spend a short time in meditation, it completely relaxes you, and it's easier to see your way through problems. If everyone in the world started meditating, the world would be a much, much happier place. Despite all the high times and good vibes and great material, Paul and Jane left the ashram next, arriving home on 26 March. McCartney remembered, "I gave myself a set period, and then if it was going to be something we really had to go back to India for, I was thinking of going back. But at the end of the month, I was quite happy, and I thought, well, that'll do me, this is fine. If I want to get into it heavy, I can do it anywhere." That's one of the nice things about it. It's like you don't have to go to church to do it. You can do it in your own room. Canadian Paul Saltzman felt that Jane Asher might have encouraged Paul's decision to leave early. Cynthia Lennon seemed the most pleased by the Maharishi's plans for the future of his worldwide meditation organization. Jane was the least impressed. She was less interested in the Maharishi and meditation and more interested in traveling with Paul to see the Taj Mahal. And then came great controversy. Nearly every afternoon Maharishi sent for me to come to his bungalow for a private talk, remembers Mia Farrow. From the start he had been especially attentive to me, and I responded with wary resentment. Not only does he send for me every single day and not the others, I complained to my sister, but also he's giving me mangoes. To the best of my knowledge, he has not given a single mango to anyone else. Prudence said the problem was me. Many details of the Beatles' visit to Rishikesh and the events that led to them leaving so suddenly are still uncertain. The Farrow Maharishi story is the most popular, but it doesn't really quite ring true. Mia Farrow was just 21 when she married Frank Sinatra and was an insecure, emotional young girl from a troubled Hollywood background. Like the Beatles, she was thrust into the spotlight at an early age and was still quite inexperienced despite her position as a Hollywood ingenue. It was after her unhappy 2-year union with Sinatra that she and her sister went to the Maharishi. For years, when she was asked whether the rumor that he had made a pass at her was true, she did not answer. But when she published her autobiography, What Falls Away, in 1997, she confirmed, half-heartedly, that something happened. "Now we will meditate in my cave," said Maharishi, and I followed him down some deep wooden steps into a dark, humid little cellar room that smelled of sandalwood. It was my first time in his cave. There was a small shrine with flowers and a picture of Gurudev, Maharishi's dead teacher, and a carpet on which we settled ourselves in the lotus position to meditate. After 20 minutes or so, we were getting to our feet, still facing each other, but as I'm usually a little disoriented after meditation, I was blinking at his beard when suddenly I became aware of two surprisingly male, hairy arms going around me. I panicked and shot up the stairs, apologizing all the way. I flew out into the open air and ran as fast as I could to Prudy's room, where she was meditating, of course. I blurted out something about Maharishi's cave and arms and beard, and she said, "It's an honor to be touched by a holy man after meditation, a tradition. Furthermore, at my level of consciousness, if Jesus Christ himself had embraced me, I would have misinterpreted it." So what was, in fact, the genesis of the final split between the Beatles and the Maharishi? Mike Dolan insists that when SRM founder Charles Lute learned from ashram insider Nancy Cook that the Maharishi was making plans for a film with Apple, Lutz boarded the first Delhi-bound plane he could find to put the brakes on the scheme, as he already had an agreement with the Guru to make a film about him and musician Paul Horn. The company he formed, Bliss Productions, was in danger of losing the star of their movie, the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The Beatles were under contract to make yet another movie with United Artists, and thus couldn't have appeared in Bliss Productions' epic. Also, Lutz apparently was annoyed that the Guru was spending so much time with the group. Some say that it was the nurse from New York who became close to the Maharishi, and not Farrow at all. Mike Dolan has said, "I was very aware that especially back in 1968 there was a knee-jerk reaction to disbelieve this young woman and stab her with her own sexuality. For the nurse's part, she had a fixed ticket home and just wanted to get the hell out of there. RB eventually rather mysteriously got another earlier flight, but at what price? Did she back up Magic Alex's stories about the Guru screwing and thus ensure the final betrayal of the Beatles' faith? To date, there have been 3 literary accounts of the event, by Mike Dolan, Cynthia Lennon, and Nancy Cook, all of whom saw Magic Alex as the bad guy. Both he and Lutz wanted to get the gullible yet immensely powerful Beatles out of the Maharishi's orbit so that Alexis could regain his influence over them and Lutz could win back the attention of his guru and get his movie made. Ironically, they both failed. Dolan remembers the final split between the Maharishi and the Beatles. On the morning of 12 April, I was awoken by Rajendra, a senior Maharishi liaison to all Western disciples. It was still dark in the very early dawn. I was to go down to the dining area and find the cooks to make tea for some guests who were leaving. It was a little startling to see Cynthia, Patty, Jenny, and R.B., the New York nurse, standing around in the cool morning air. Sitting in the open dining area in deep conversation were John, George, Alexis, and Rajendra. Cowboy Tom, R.B.'s ex-boyfriend, sat to the side. All were dressed in stylish pop star attire. I noticed that Cynthia had been crying. Nobody looked happy. Patty and Jenny smiled meekly. Rajendra, a lovely man, wore the gray ashen mask of the defeated. I noticed Maharishi sitting alone on a rock just outside his garden. The rain from the night before threw up a light mist, giving the scene a theatrical effect. Rajendra told me something had happened. There had been meetings all through the night, that John and George were upset, and Alexis were insisting that they all leave. Rajendra was giving the job of transporting them all to New Delhi, and they were very upset when they got into several taxis. The girls, sobbing, were still trying to persuade them to reconsider, that they were fighting back tears as they drove away. They started filming the Maharishi movie that very morning. There was a big hullabaloo about him trying to rape Mia Farrow or trying to get off with her or some other women. Things like that, Lennon later said. And we went down to him, and we stayed up all night discussing whether it was true or not. And when George started thinking that it just might be true, I thought, well, It must be true, because if George is doubting it, then there's got to be something in it. So we went to see the Maharishi, the whole gang of us, the next day. We charged down to his hut, his very rich-looking bungalow in the mountains, and I was the spokesman as usual when the dirty work came. I actually had to be the leader, whatever the scene was, when it came to the nitty-gritty, and I had to do the speaking, and I said, "We're leaving." "Why, he, and all that shit?" And I said, "Well, if you're so cosmic, you'll know why." He was always intimating, and there were all his right-hand men intimating that he did miracles. He said, "I don't know why, you must tell me." I just kept saying, "You know why," and he gave me a look, like, "I'll kill you, you bastard." He gave me such a look, and I knew that when he looked at me, because I'd called his bluff, and I was a bit rough on him, I must admit. To this very day, many of those who were there do not believe that the Maharishi ever made a move on any of his female followers, including Mia Farrow. That list included George Harrison, fellow meditator Mike Dolan, Nancy Cook, Paul Horn, Jenny Boyd, Paul McCartney, and Cynthia Lennon, who later denounced the man she believed was the culprit. The finger of suspicion was well and truly pointed at the man who had given us all so much. Alexis and a fellow female meditator, the nurse, began to sow the seeds of doubt in very open minds. Meditation practiced for long periods renders the meditator truly sensitive. Alexis's statements about how the Maharishi had been indiscreet with a certain lady gathered momentum. All, may I say, without a single shred of evidence or indeed justification. It was obvious to me that Alexis wanted out, and more than anything, he wanted the Beatles out as well. A night was spent desperately trying to sort everything out in their minds, what to believe, Alexis and this girl's accusations or their faith in the Maharishi. The following morning, Alexis set the ball in motion by ordering cars to take us all to the airport. While we were seated around the dining room table waiting for the Maharishi and conversing in whispers, nerve ends showing, the Maharishi emerged quietly from his quarters and seated himself not 100 yards from our agitated group of dissidents. One of his ardent followers asked us to please talk things over properly with the Maharishi. The Maharishi was sitting alone in a small shelter made of wood with a dried grass roof. They stood up, filed past him, and not a word was said. The journey away from my personal Shangri-La was miserable. Although John wasn't as glum as I, he was worried. Although he had gone through the motions of rejecting the Maharishi, he was very nervous about the situation. The final Beatles song composed in India represented for John the entire Rishikesh experience. "Maharishi, what have you done?" On the long drive back to Delhi, he thought of calling it simply Maharishi, until George observed, "You can't say that, it's ridiculous." He suggested the title Sexy Sadie, which John later viewed as a cop-out. The Rishikesh experience was over, and the Beatles had left with a bad taste, as Lennon put it. They came back, though, with a treasure trove of new material, but John emphasized that it could have just as well been written in the desert. Still, the time spent in Rishikesh represented the last spurt of creativity in Lennon during his time with the Beatles. Over the next 2 years, he regularly tapped into his 1968 pool of songs. Whatever the Maharishi was or is to the world, the Beatles' time in India prompted a flood of wonderful, enduring work. At home, undeveloped musical ideas sprouted, and the White Album was born. The experience was still in John's mind a decade later when he wrote 2 songs for an unperformed play. The Ballad of John and Yoko, the first, and the Happy Rishikesh song, is a satirical piece that makes light of the meditation and mantras that promised all the answers. Of special interest is its coda, which, in sharp contrast to the title, is reminiscent of the lyrics of Your Blues. I feel so suicidal, something is wrong. In the second tribute, India, John remarks that he left his heart in England with Yoko. It touches upon his search for answers in India, but recognizes that the truth will not come from Rishikesh, but is already in his mind. Today, alive and well in a sprawling monastery in the Netherlands, the Maharishi, now well into his 80s, continues to oversee his ever-expanding worldwide conglomerate of real estate holdings, schools, and clinics worth a reported $3.5 billion. What strikes you is his energy and vitality, says Martin Smeets, a former local mayor and an occasional visitor to the 90-acre compound from which the guru seldom strays. You get the impression he's still at the forefront of all these global activities. He introduced meditation to the West and made it mainstream, says Deepak Chopra, who was Maharishi's top assistant for some 9 years, yet he never took anything too seriously. We called him the giggling guru. During his last days, George Harrison visited the Maharishi for solace and advice, and vehemently insisted in the Beatles anthology that the guru had never been anything but a sincere spiritual guide, a genuine inspiration, and a lifelong celibate. Recently, even Paul McCartney and his new wife Heather have made secret visits to another of the Maharishi's homes high in the Swiss Alps. Ringo, too, professes only fond memories of the Beatles' time at the feet of their first guru. That the Maharishi brought them a measure of much-needed inner peace and planted in them a lifelong ideal of spiritual enlightenment independent of the material body is sure. Always laughing and happy as he taught the 5,000-year-old art of Vedic meditation, the Maharishi did more good than harm in his mission to transcendentalize the world. As Cynthia Lennon said, the fact that he tried so hard for so long makes both his life and mission an unquestionable success.
Part 3. The exact particulars of the Beatles' cutting ties with the Maharishi can be laid directly at the feet of the Beatles' maneuvering, opportunistic, so-called friend, the odious, usury, Greek conman and would-be inventor, Magic Alex Mardos. What follows are the recollections of several of the principals who were on the scene at the time, as well as the giggly guru. First up is filmmaker Alan Waite, followed by a high-level Maharishi executive, the diminutive guru himself, and finally his longtime aide and confidant, scientist and media darling, Deepak Chopra.
Paul McCartney and I think George Harrison came in and said, "We'd like to speak to Maharishi for a minute." Maharishi got up and took the two Beatles into another room. I don't know what they said. They were there about 20 minutes or so and talking. And they came out of that meeting and they shook hands and said, "We're leaving, our limos are here, and we're leaving the ashram, and I submit you, and goodbye."
I won't mention names, but there was a friend of the Beatles who was disturbed that the Beatles were so seriously intent on the program. He generated some rumors, and the rumors got to John and particularly, and it made them upset. They thought Maharishi was something less than they thought he was. So they were upset.
I think I would love them, whatever they say.
Why do you think they made such a statement?
I'm unaware completely why.
Do you think
I only extend my love to them.
We had a private meeting with Maharishi, George Harrison, myself, where George apologized for the behavior of the Beatles in the 60s, and Maharishi refused to acknowledge that they had behaved inappropriately. He said, "The Beatles created such music for the world that I thought they were angels, and I would never be angry with them. I would never be upset with them, no matter what John said."
The journey away from my personal Shangri-La was miserable. Although John wasn't as glum as I, he was worried. Although he had gone through the motions of rejecting the Maharishi, he was very nervous about the situation. The final Beatles song composed in India represented for John the entire Rishikesh experience. "Maharishi, what have you done?" On the long drive back to Delhi, he thought of calling it simply Maharishi, until George observed, "You can't say that, it's ridiculous." He suggested the title Sexy Sadie, which John later viewed as a cop-out. The Rishikesh experience was over, and the Beatles had left with a bad taste, as Lennon put it. They came back, though, with a treasure trove of new material, but John emphasized that it could have just as well been written in the desert. Still, the time spent in Rishikesh represented the last spurt of creativity in Lennon during his time with the Beatles. Over the next 2 years, he regularly tapped into his 1968 pool of songs. Whatever the Maharishi was or is to the world, the Beatles' time in India prompted a flood of wonderful, enduring work. At home, undeveloped musical ideas sprouted, and the White Album was born. The experience was still in John's mind a decade later when he wrote 2 songs for an unperformed play. The Ballad of John and Yoko, the first, and the Happy Rishikesh song, is a satirical piece that makes light of the meditation and mantras that promised all the answers. Of special interest is its coda, which, in sharp contrast to the title, is reminiscent of the lyrics of Your Blues. I feel so suicidal, something is wrong. In the second tribute, India, John remarks that he left his heart in England with Yoko. It touches upon his search for answers in India, but recognizes that the truth will not come from Rishikesh, but is already in his mind. Today, alive and well in a sprawling monastery in the Netherlands, the Maharishi, now well into his 80s, continues to oversee his ever-expanding worldwide conglomerate of real estate holdings, schools, and clinics worth a reported $3.5 billion. What strikes you is his energy and vitality, says Martin Smeets, a former local mayor and an occasional visitor to the 90-acre compound from which the guru seldom strays. You get the impression he's still at the forefront of all these global activities. He introduced meditation to the West and made it mainstream, says Deepak Chopra, who was Maharishi's top assistant for some 9 years, yet he never took anything too seriously. We called him the giggling guru. During his last days, George Harrison visited the Maharishi for solace and advice, and vehemently insisted in the Beatles anthology that the guru had never been anything but a sincere spiritual guide, a genuine inspiration, and a lifelong celibate. Recently, even Paul McCartney and his new wife Heather have made secret visits to another of the Maharishi's homes high in the Swiss Alps. Ringo, too, professes only fond memories of the Beatles' time at the feet of their first guru. That the Maharishi brought them a measure of much-needed inner peace and planted in them a lifelong ideal of spiritual enlightenment independent of the material body is sure. Always laughing and happy as he taught the 5,000-year-old art of Vedic meditation, the Maharishi did more good than harm in his mission to transcendentalize the world. As Cynthia Lennon said, the fact that he tried so hard for so long makes both his life and mission an unquestionable success.
Radhe 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 Bolo, Radhe Govinda Bolo. 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 Radhe 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 bolo, Radhe Govinda bolo, Radhe 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 bolo, Radhe Govinda bolo.
Oh, deep blue Lord of my heart, show me your unmasked face, shining like 1,000 suns in an empty sky. Oh, ragged soul, unleash me from the body, free me from mind, release me from the iron grip of the senses, banish me forever from this weary world. Dear Redeemer, I bow to you by the reedy river, see you in the trees, gather you in the harvest, breathe you in the morning breeze. Soul shaker, shake loose my pride, turn me upside down, drown me in your foaming tide. Lord Shri Krishna, smiling cowherd of Vrindavan, allow me entrance into your abode, but only as a speck of dust along your road, or a feather fallen from your proud peacocks, a drop of water in your ocean. Nothing grand may I be, but grand enough to live with thee.
Radhe 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 bolo, Radhe Govinda bolo. 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 Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Geoffrey Giuliano is the author of some 30 internationally best-selling books on the Beatles, John Lennon, and other iconic musicians of the 1960s. In 2006, his book, Paint It Black, The Murder of Brian Jones, was made into a film by Stephen Woolley and Nick Powell entitled Stoned, The Wild and Wicked World of Brian Jones. It remains a cult classic and the only film bio of the Rolling Stones. Giuliano is also a veteran journalist, having written for dozens of high-profile newspapers and magazines, including The Sunday People, The Daily Mail, The News of the World, The Mail on Sunday, Playgirl, and Rolling Stone. A noted film actor, Giuliano starred in such movies as Vikingdom, Scorpion King 3, Jules Verne's The Mysterious Island, The Fifth Execution, Far Cry 3, Fire Desire, among many. In addition, he hosted the long-running North American syndicated radio series, Geoffrey Giuliano's Roots of Rock, for 5 years, as well as pioneering the audiobook industry in the 1990s by authoring, narrating, and producing over 250 original, non-book-based, interview-driven productions. Giuliano's publishers included Random House, HarperCollins, Delta Entertainment, Durkin Hayes, Playaway Audio, Speechworks, and B&B Audio, among dozens more internationally. In 1998, Random House acquired his firm Tribute Audio, for which Giuliano acted as CEO and publisher for 5 years. His best-selling audiobook, That Fateful Night, True Stories of Titanic Survivors in Their Own Words, was nominated for a Grammy. In 2014, Geoffrey Giuliano founded Icon Editions and G2 Media Arts to market his updated works as well as publish new projects. As a visual artist, Geoffrey has been showing in galleries across America since 1977, garnering impressive reviews. His first professional assignment was designing several T-shirts for The Who's Pete Townshend in 1976. Geoffrey also designed and illustrated many of his original rock biographies for the biggest publishers in the world from 1984 to 2006, as well as designing for his pioneering record label, Samba Records, in the mid-1990s. From 2006 to 2011, Geoffrey was also the primary designer for the French fashion house Cotai. When Giuliano first conceived of creating his own literary imprint, Icon Editions, he became responsible for illustrating and designing 35 book covers, several hundred CDs, DVDs, as well as dozens of promotional posters, and eventually an entire collection of exclusive fashion and art. The expansive Design by Giuliano brand grew out of Geoffrey's impressive commitment to the arts and is the culmination of a lifetime's work by an extraordinarily talented and determined Renaissance man.
Your host and narrator, Geoffrey Giuliano. We hope you've enjoyed this Icon audio presentation. Inner Lion Media. Thank you for listening.